Wake Up Jacob, Israelite Prepper here. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a review or recap, and it's of the book We Want for Our Sister What We Want for Ourselves, right? And I just want to read like a little excerpt from it. And this is in chapter 1, and it is called The Monogamy Myth. Now, I don't know what page that's going to be on in your book because this is a Kindle version here, but let's see here. It says monogamy myth. It said, although monogamy is the only marriage practice that is morally sanctioned and socially accepted in the Western world, particularly in the United States, some argue that monogamy as a marriage practice is myth. Hillman, 1986, for example, argues that plural marriages or polygamy is found throughout the world in a variety of forms that are culturally determined. Page 10. In most societies where it occurs, there is simultaneous polygamy, the practice of having more than one spouse at the same time. The familiar form among Western peoples is consecutive polygamy, whereby a person may have one spouse after another in a sequence involving divorce and remarriage. Considering the close to 50% divorce rate in various relationship, marriage, and family formations that emerge from it, and that's at the time of this writing. I mean, divorce rate right now in America is hitting 70. It's like north of 60. Tiger, 1978, suggests that U.S. society is moving in the direction of onigamy, right? O-N-I, onigamy. This is a situation in which each will be married to all, like group marriage. Okay, it's like everybody's married to everybody. Interesting, Morgan, 1963, proposed that the pairing family, a marriage from where individuals remained together until they were no longer happy, existed during the early stage of human development. But the ease with which individuals can get divorced in the United States, indicates that such a form is still quite prevalent. If one were to apply this classification scheme to the current state of affairs, one might conclude that U.S. society still exists in the stage of barbarism. And you got to read the book to understand what she's talking about in barbarism, right? These propositions suggest that one can enter into and out of marriage in ways that indicate the prevalence of plural marriage from both men and women in Western societies. However, contrary to common belief, simultaneous polygyny has also been widely accepted as and was quite prevalent throughout human history and experience, especially in Africa. So it's a series of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The first chapter of this book really talks about where forced or mandatory monogamy came from, which is a Greco-Roman concept, right? It was just kind of forced on them. And the marriages, they talk about how in the Western world it's actually kind of a hypocritical form, because what do? Okay, with people like us, we have side chicks and people on the side, and you have serial relationships. People end up in situationships. A lot of butter muffins out there, just kind of maintain two relationships at one time, just one in secret. That's what they do. That's what our society does, right? So you have that. And when it comes to the Greco-Roman way of doing everything, they actually had it, maintained it through slavery, right? So you had, the slave masters, they had women, and they were like in relationship, and they had kids, right? And they had that, right? They had that, and their wives knew. You got to read the book. And their wives knew. Okay, it's just that they could not have a slave girl on their arm, as their woman type of thing. But no, there was basically their sex toy or whatever. But it was a wife. They had relationships. They had kids, things like that. And it was just a forced idea. Then it talks about how the Mormons started to come into power, and they pretty much sowed their hands a little bit too early, but they started to come into power, right? So their families started to grow and grow and grow, and then they start to get into positions of power. But then when they said, hey, we're Mormon, we're polygynous, we're this and that, the government put the kibosh on that, right? So it's a very, very interesting book or whatever, and it is a different concept. Most of throughout history, polygyny has just been a normal thing. But You know, some people throughout history have been pretty hypocritical of it. I mean, even go back to the times of the Egyptians when the pharaohs worried that the Hebrews would out multiply them or whatever. Why is that? Well, because, you know, polygyny. But at the same time, this book, I would love to go into some other areas here. That's the monogamy myth. I'm trying to find some particular excerpts, because in a society, hold on, let me go to polygyny. Let me go to the other part. Polygyny, explanations for the practice of polygyny. Okay, I've read that part. African polygyny, experiences and perspectives of women, which again, you'll learn that in a lot of societies that polygyny, the women wanted it. The women opted for it. They wanted it. Let's see, Kilbride. What are some other headings that we have here? Western polygyny. I'll read a little bit for you, and I'll just end it here. Monogamy with a peculiar form of polygyny, concubinage, and prostitution. That's where the rubber hits the road. It's really talking about a lot of that. Just give you a little bit of it. Polygyny as a marriage practice has rarely been found in European societies, but a peculiar form of it did exist right along with monogamy. However, to the disadvantage of women, the Euro version, right? Although the evolutionary paradigm underlying Lewis H. Morgan's theory of the origins of marriage and family is problematic, there are, however, factors delineated by him as it pertains to the evolution of monogamy in the Greco-Roman world. According to Morgan, a major factor in the development of monogamous families form was property and the need for legitimate heirs to inherit. Page 475. Thus, the growth of property and the desire for its transmission to children was in reality the moving power which brought in monogamy, especially among the Greeks, one of the earliest people to whom it can be traced. However, there were two factors under the Grecian form of the monogamous family that resulted in the oppression of women. The first is that the chief object of marriage was the procreation of children. Bearing children was, for the most part, the only role that women could assume. Second is the evolvement of concubinage and prostitution. In his work, The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, Frederick Engels also observed that fundamental to the development of monogamy, especially among the Greeks, was supremacy of man over woman, and central to this was the need to produce heirs to inherit property. Property. Remember that, guys. That's what we're talking about. This is why we have a need for patriarchy. Okay, but again, property means something, but it get lost on us when we forget our heritage and get our way and just forget tribalism and patriarchy altogether. But back to the work. Engels' work, however, examines this further by showing how concubinage and prostitution also evolved and existed along with monogamy. He notes that although there were goddesses in early periods in Greek history and women were freer and more respected, women were already being humiliated under the domination of men by competition from girl slaves in the system of concubinage, right? Citing an example from Homer's Iliad, where captive slave girls were taken as booty back to Greece and brought under the same roof as the wife, Engels remarked, okay? So these slave girls in competition. So they had it, right? They just had it in a form of, you know, slave and concubines, prostitution, things like that, you know. That's how the Europeans got down, okay? So they like this whole idea of monogamy, and this is the only way, and this is the right way. But they still had prostitutes. They still had slaves. They still had concubines. They still had all that, but no polygyny. Polygyny's not right. So, it's a fascinating work, right? I can read more and go on and on and on, but they've done it. It's a hypocritical form of doing it. Okay, it's just hypocritical form of doing it. A polygynist is out, open, hey, I'm a polygynist, these are my wives, these are my responsibilities, so on and so forth. You're someone who wants to force monogamy. Why do you have to force it? That's my first question. Why would you have to force it? But anyway, so that's what we're talking about. They get into legitimate wife, illegitimate wife, and all this other stuff. That's not how the Most High sees it, guys. That's not how Most High sees it, but, again, this has come from a Greco-Roman perspective, okay? They had that idea, okay, of this whole forced monogamy, and that's the only way. It was a way to keep their own power structures, a way to transfer wealth. It's their way of doing everything, okay? So keep that in mind. I will give you guys some more breakdowns. I'll read a little bit more. But again, this is, we want for our sisters what we want for ourselves. This will be part one of a recap, okay? So part one of a recap. Talk to you guys on the next one. Israelite Prepper.